All right, that looks like we are recording. So I'm going to try using the Sabre for this, and I hope you can all see it fairly okay. But now we're going to look at the parries of quarte, not quarte. It's either spelled or pronounced quarte, and there are phonetic spellings of it in the period. So you do get variation spellings of fencing terms, which I think is great because it means that we actually know how they're pronouncing it. But I'm going to call it quarte, as in quarter, because it's the fourth hand position. Basically, in British Sabre, there was a point where they started using French hand positions to describe all the parries. Traditionally, the parries in British sword play were described by what they covered, so inside guard, outside guard, that kind of thing. Or alternatively, they were numbered the same as the cuts. So parry of quarte has the same hand position as cut one, so it was just parry one. It's also the parry used to parry cut one. I think the reason they went to the French numbering system is because they wanted to describe a greater variety of parries, and it made sense to use French numbering because everyone was already familiar with French flow anyway. Anyway, let's look at the parry of quarte. So come on guard, my medium guard. And then to go to the parry of quarte, I keep my elbow pretty much still, or in roughly the same place. I don't want to let my elbow drift in. And what I'll get you to do for the first time you do this, rest your hand against your side and your sword side elbow so that it stays in place. So you've got a physical cue as to where it is in space. And then what you do is you turn your hand over to pretty much the same hand position as you used for cut number one, turning from the elbow, so the elbow stays in place, but the hand moves over. You bring your hand over so it's in line with the outer edge of your body, or actually technically the inside edge, and you let your tip come up. Your tip should be up at 45 degrees. So when I'm on guard, and this is same for true of a medium guard and a quarte guard, my tip is down, point at my opponent's face. When I'm parrying, my tip is up nice and high, specifically because I want to stop my opponent from cutting over the top of my sword as a feint. And that's my quarte guard. And so each of those actions are done at the same time. I don't do them incrementally. I just punch out to the position with my tip up and my hand in the right position. It's all done at once. But I like to break it down because it makes it a bit easier to explain. So from the medium guard, I turn my hand over, lift my tip up, and bring my hand over to be in line with the edge of my body, or specifically I want my thumb on that line. And you can practice this in front of. Also, your tip should be pointed or in line with the other side of your body. So I want my tip in line with this shoulder, or not level with, but sitting vertically above, so that my sword is in front of me, it's covering in front of me. My tip is out like this, and I get feinted. It's very hard to come back. My tip is centered, or even just on the center line, let alone sort of in line with the other edge of my body, I'm relatively covered. So let's have a look at that. So let's all just practice that a few times. So go quarte and back to guard, 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 quarte and back to guard. All right, so that's roughly the quarte guard. It's the guard you use against cut one, or anything that comes into basically this, which is the inside comes along the inside line. I cover with my quarte guard. But let's say something comes in a little bit lower. So something's coming in, maybe at my belly or even at my upper thigh. I can parry that with LowCarb. So all I do is from the position of a quarte parry, I open up my elbow, I extend my elbow, I keep my tip is pointing at my opponent, and I come down to this LowCarb position. And it's important to remember that, the parry of quarte is a midway on a spectrum between LowCarb and HighCarb. And where you are exactly depends on where your opponent's blows comes in. But there'll be times when I'll parry like this, especially if I'm taller than my opponent and their blows are coming in low. I tend to throw some quite low parries, down at them. So from guard, all I do is punch straight down to LowCarb. My hand is still roughly in line with my body. My tip is in line with the other side of my body so that my blade is actually, is coming across. This is going to vary a little bit when you've got an opponent coming at you at a weird angle, but basic idea is your tip is in line with one side of your body, your hand is in line with the other. Back to guard, cart, or low cart. Low cart. Practice a few times more. Low cart. Again, low cart. Guard, low cart. Again, low cart. Back to guard, low cart, and back to guard. So let's say I need to parry something coming quite high, like someone's throwing a particularly high horizontal cut. So I'm going to parry that with high cut. So what I do is I starting at the position of cut, I raise my sword by bending from my shoulder. I don't ever want to let my arm get less than 90 degrees, because if my arm is less than 90 degrees and something force comes in and hits here, my own hand or the force here means that my forearm becomes a lever on my elbow. Force comes in, elbow bends, because elbows are good at bending, and they'll do it just by themselves. They don't need you to bend for them. Whereas if I keep my elbow above 90 degrees, when the force comes in, it hits, and the force will go down the line of my arm, basically pushing my sword down. And this is kind of good for me, because it means if my sword is displaced, it's displacing my opponent's sword downward, which opens them up for a nice riposte. So rather than blasting through my parry, an over-vigorous opponent will actually set themselves up for a counter, which I think is quite cool. So high card is just up here. Make sure your arm is above 90 degrees. In this case, my tip is further over because I don't want to smash into my roof, but if I start lower, I do it from low, from this kneeling position. All I do is punch up to high card. Right, so let's practice that a few times. So high card, back to guard, high card, and 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 back to guard. All right. So those are the 3 cart parries that you use to cover your inside line. Generally, they're good for, cart is good for cut 1, or like, a horizontal cut thrown, somewhere in your torso area, so like cut 5 to the torso. Low cut is good for a rising cut number 3, alternatively a really, really low cut 5. High cut is good for like a high cut 5, but it can also stop cut number 1, but by parrying up near top of the blade, up near the foible, which gives you much greater leverage on your return. And there's sort of this this matter of judgment and sort of brinkmanship, where if I want to really make sure that I stop a cut 1 coming at me, I'll parry with cut because that gives me good coverage. But if I want to really line up a good riposte, start parrying a bit higher or raise my hand. And it doesn't mean all the way up here where I'm catching just the foible, because that can be a bit risky and I might get undercut. But I might parry even just a little higher and take and get close to their foible and increase my chances of landing a riposte. So let's round this out by, I'm going to call high, low, and cart randomly, and I want you to punch to each position, preferably without smashing the roof. So, just going through each parry. So, low cart, and back to guard. High cart, and back to guard. Cart, back to guard. Cart, back to guard. Cart, back to guard. Low cart, back to guard. High cart, back to guard, low cart, back to guard, cart, back to guard, high cart, and back to guard, low cart, and back to guard. All right, so I got a bit of randomness in there. All right, so let's see if there's any questions, or if anyone has any questions about those parries. And just as I'm putting my earpiece in, so you've got a chance to type your questions in the chat. Just as kind of a bit of kind of, I don't know, trivia, or just like an explanation of how I approach teaching. The reason why I get you to do the parries randomly is it changes the nature of the exercise. So when you're watching the video and just copying me, what you're actually doing is mimicking me, and then your ability with fencing kind of comes down to how well you can apply your skill at mimicry to something that isn't mimicry. Whereas if I get you to do it randomly, you start, you're not thinking about how do I copy Tim, you're thinking about how do I get to the position. And this works even better when you've got, random cuts coming at you, because you're then actually solving the problem of how do I stop this cut, which makes the action more like it is in a sword fight. In a sword fight, a parry is a solution to the problem of how do I stop this cut. And I think that's and that randomness, I think, is really, really important for learning, because it changes the context of what you're doing. So are there any questions? That looks like a no.